We can start.
Can't we? Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the With Chinese Characteristics podcast. I'm Natalie.
I'm Cherry.
And together we talk about topics with Chinese characteristics. It's quite a self-explanatory name, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
We're going to have to do better banter than that, Cherry. You need to sell it more.
I'm trying to be supportive.
Yeah, but you need to act like that was actually funny.
How?
People aren't going to know what how means. How?
Chinese people will know what that means.
Okay, well, Chinese people will know.
Okay, we can try again. We can try
We'll do
different,
Chinese vocabulary hour. So if somebody says something that you really agree with, it was a really good idea, like at a meeting or something, what should you do in Chinese, Cherry?
How?
How? Yeah, that's your Chinese vocab for today is how.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I agree with what you said, and that sounds like a real good idea.
It's got a lot of meaning in just that one word.
Yeah. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you gotta be a little higher energy.
Okay, I'm so high energy. I didn't know we were going to do a word of the day.
We didn't know, well, it was kind of an improvised word of the day.
Okay. How?
Okay, so anyway, so Cherry, what's our topic for today? Now that we've fulfilled this designated dose of banter.
So, today's topic is the Great Wall of China.
Okay.
Not what you thought it is. Okay, that doesn't make grammatic sense.
Okay. So for the Great Wall, right? Let me think of what I think of when I think of the Great Wall.
Mm-hmm.
I think...
Well, actually, I did write an intro, so I should have just
let's say the intro.
I'm sorry.
What's the intro?
Okay. So the Great Wall of China. We've all heard of it. We've all seen it in a picture or a movie or a textbook.
Or Civilization 6.
Or Civilization 6. It was built to defend China against invaders, and it is 22,000 years old. It is
I don't think
2200.
It's 22,000, Cherry. The ancient Sumerians would have been...
It is 2200 years old.
Yeah.
It's glorious, overwhelmingly grand, and it's a national symbol of China that has transcended dynasties and emperors. That's the old tale that we've all heard of.
Yeah, that it's like...
Is that fair?
Yeah, that it's been around, that it almost like kind of is China in a way, and that it's a thing that's persisted through all of the change.
However, in reality, the Great Wall of China has a much more complicated, sometimes even contradicting history than what the old common tale describes.
Okay.
So let's go back to the very beginning.
Well, let's do it.
Okay. So the official line that the Great Wall was 2,200 years old, it dates back to the beginning of the walls that was built around 221 BC.
Okay.
So that was when Qing Shi Huang, the Qing Emperor, the first emperor that has ever unified China under the imperial system as one.
Was that the guy in Hero?
That was the guy in Hero.
Okay, so if you've ever seen the movie Hero, if you haven't seen it, it's a naked piece of essentially like CCP One China propaganda, but it's disguised.
That's your opinion.
It's my opinion, but it's disguised as a movie where people like wear flowy clothes and do swords fights. The emperor was that. Okay, so it's the first guy who united what we now call China.
Part of what we now call China.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was, indeed, I'll put it out first, there was this long wall project that he did build a or multiple walls.
Okay.
So that was factual.
Well, why did he build a wall?
Okay,
Oh, we're getting there?
Yeah, we're getting there.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just too excited.
So he did have this project that was very elaborate, and it was a construction of a lengthy and costly wall.
Okay.
Right? However, first of all, this project come after another grand goal accomplished. And that project prior was to tear down the old walls first. And the old walls that he was tearing down before this long wall that was later called the Great Wall was because to unite China, he had to defeat 7 different states.
Okay.
Well, including him, I guess. So, he had to defeat 6
different
states. He had to defeat 6 states.
He had to unite 7 states.
Yes. And, during what we now call...
NorCal? San Francisco?
Exactly. I cannot say those.
How much wine you have tonight, Cherry?
What?
How much wine you have?
Just a little bit. To sort of smooth things over.
Yeah.
Perhaps smooth over too much.
Yeah.
So, please don't cut this in. Okay. Emperor Qing's victory was the result of defeating several states during the Warring State period.
Okay.
Okay.
Or one of the Warring States period, right?
Yes, but this is called the Warring State period.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the official name apparently. The translation at least. 战国时期.
So
speak Chinese.
So he was the first guy to unite China But how did they know what China was, and if no one had united it yet?
Well, he did. He had this idea.
Of like, okay.
Well, he knew that he hated the Confucius. So Confucius actually was this scholarly master, right?
Yeah.
And he spent his life trying to convince one or more of these leaders of the nations at this time.
Yeah.
This is the same time as, and try to convince them to sort of establish this rule of society.
Okay.
He failed, obviously.
Yeah.
But his theories and his work was later picked up by the later dynasties. However, the Qing Shi Huang, the Qing Emperor, hated
Confucius really screwed up then. Because the guy who actually took over China...
He picked the wrong horse. Backed the wrong horse, right? So he did not like it.
Yeah.
He burned a lot of books. He did unite. He sort of set up the standard for writing.
Okay.
And people were speaking similar language. You know what I mean? And then...
Who set up the standard for writing? Confucius?
No, the Qing Emperor.
Oh, okay, Qing Emperor, okay.
He set up the measuring system,
Yeah, that's all stuff that's important, right?
Yeah.
Weights and measures and...
Yes. It's one country now.
Okay, so it almost sounds like he united China just to spite Confucius.
Yeah. He didn't like them.
Okay,
He really, yeah.
Okay, so basically there was an area that was like people, mostly similar culture.
Also, he was the first emperor. He called himself the emperor.
Okay.
He claimed himself as an emperor, unlike the kings or like the nobles before him.
So he was a king of kings.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
But there's no other kings at this point. He's still higher than if they were a king. He's an emperor.
I guess that makes sense because it's like when they say Alexander the Great conquered the known world, right? It's like, well, how do you know when you've stopped and you've hit the known world? And I guess it's wherever you say it is.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
So I guess whatever he said was China.
It was China.
It is China. Okay. Interesting.
It was his world.
Okay.
That we live in, right? Well, we don't, but the people.
So before that, it was just a group of countries.
So all these 7 states.
Yeah.
Before there was one China, constructed extensive fortification walls between each other to defend their own borders. Mm-hmm. Okay. So after the unification, the first order of business was to tear those walls down first within this new unified country.
That's fairly common, I think. Like in Europe, whenever you take over a place, you tear down all the nobles' castles, right? So they can't stop you from doing whatever you want. So
with all these walls teared down, that project is accomplished, that he was set out to start the Long Wall project. So at this point, they call it the Long Wall, which is still what we call the Great Wall in Chinese, which is called Changchun, which is literally a long wall.
Okay.
And nowadays, the simplified version of the purpose of the Long Wall project was so that the Chinese could defend themselves against invaders.
Okay.
Is that fair? Is that a fair statement?
Well, you're saying that's how we describe it today?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so okay, there's kind of two purposes. I guess 3 technically. You hear like one is it's like, okay, it's to defend against invaders. 2 is it's like for trade, right? To define borders. Mm-hmm. And then 3 is it's because there's these like space aliens that live out in the wastes. They'll come and attack China.
Lizards?
Yeah, they're like giant lizards. And Brad Pitt and Chinese people have to stop them.
Matt Damon.
Oh, Matt Damon, whatever. They all look the same. Have to stop them from climbing up the wall and invading China. Or they'll
some Hollywood A-lister who like could use some cash.
Yeah, I could use some cash.
Yeah.
That's the 3rd wall, to defend against like lizard alien monsters.
Exactly. That's all true. That's all factually true.
Okay.
So the invaders at this point, however, are the Xiongnu nomads settled around the northern border of the new China.
Okay.
And the Xiongnu, I'm guessing you haven't heard of it?
No.
So the Xiongnu is a tribal confederation of nomadic people who, according to ancient Chinese sources, inhabited the eastern Eurasian steppe from the 3rd century BC to the late 1st century AD.
Okay.
The reason I say according to ancient Chinese sources is because history is written by the people with the pens and papers.
Yeah.
And this we know most of Xiongnu from the records of the people on the other side of the wall.
Yeah.
And a less boring explanation of what the Xiongnu people are is that if you watch the Mulan movie, those are the people that the Mulans of the world was fighting against.
Was it actually those specific people in Mulan?
Actually,
like what century was Mulan?
So Mulan was Chunqiu. So like Mulan was a bit later than the Qing time, right? Because the China was established for a while, things are good. But those people that she was fighting against, allegedly, was in fact Xiongnu people, and they were descendants of this group of Xiongnu people.
Okay, interesting. Why didn't China just go out and take these people out?
Well, it's about to happen.
Oh, okay.
Well, they didn't because they're like very good at fighting.
Oh, okay.
That's one reason.
Yeah.
So anyways, around this time, yes, so the Xiongnu people, they were nomads, right?
Well, they're probably tough.
They were tough. So these nomads were settled around the northern border, right, of the newly established Qing Empire.
Mm-hmm.
However, contrary to, I guess, propaganda and common belief, at this time, and this time I mean 215 BC-ish, the Xiongnu people were not really a threat yet.
Okay.
There was no war. There was no military campaign of invasion, as far as we could tell from them. And they were just really just people who settled around that area. However, the newly, the Qing emperor wanted the territory they settled on, and he wanted a clearly defined border for his new empire. He started military campaigns to chase away the loosely settled nomadic Xiongnu people around his borders, and at the same time to start the construction of the wall. In addition, the Qing Emperor also found himself in possession of a large professional army with no more internal enemies to fight, and thus he had to find a new use of them.
It's
like a jobs program.
I mean, the typical place you send them is Korea. Like when Japan had its warring states period and they unified it, they invaded Korea.
Well, here we're using them to chase away the nomads who are not bothering anyone most of the time.
Well, in the American Civil War, after they sent them to go fight the Plains Indians, the Plains Native Americans.
You need an enemy.
Yeah, you gotta do something with these people.
Yes, and that's not just that's all just part of a large effort to sort of define the border, but also chase them away. As part of the effort to stabilize the border region after they were chased away because they're not happy about that, and tighten the control of the emperor. At one point, the Qing empires also started moving settler families near the border to take up the land that were just taken back from the Xiongnu nomads. An example of it is that a whopping number of 30,000 settler families were sent out to near the border, and their task was to settle just inside the newly defined border and start living there, so that the nomads cannot come back and take it up. So 30,000 people, 30,000 families. I feel like that's a lot.
That's a lot back then. Yeah.
Yeah. This is 200 something BC, right?
Yeah.
So let me flip some papers. Okay, yeah. And their goal was to live a different lifestyle than the barbarians outside the wall, to show the difference between civilization and a barbaric, the nomads.
Do you know where the word barbarians comes from?
No.
So the Greeks, whenever they met with people outside their borders, like people to the north or to the east, they're like, oh, what are those people like? They're like, I don't know, they just went bar, 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 bar. So that they called them barbarians, because they couldn't understand what the hell they were saying.
Wow.
It sounded like they were just going bar, 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 bar. So they called
I would not have thought of that.
They called them barbarians, and it's come down through history.
I would not have guessed.
So it comes from the Greeks.
Okay. So all these efforts combined together really was like a border-defining campaign. And as soon as they chased away the nomads, they would start building the wall. Right? Or if the nomads weren't there, they would start building it too. And the wall was mostly built with earth matters, stones, and therefore all the walls that built at this time, 200 years ago, would have eroded away over the years. It is not the wall that we see in pictures and glorified, photographs today.
Because it wasn't meant to stop an army.
No, it was. So at the time, build and move on was the central guiding principle in constructing the wall, implying that we weren't erecting a permanent fixed border.
What's that? That could be another Chinese vocabulary word, chabudo.
Sure, right? Yeah. Just do the minimum so that it looks like a wall.
Chabudo is, am I pronouncing it right?
Yeah, chabudo.
Chabudo is like, it's like the Chinese term for like, it's good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fine.
It's fine.
Yeah. So there is no accurate record of how many laborers had worked on the project. A common estimate was around 3 million. And how many people have died while building the wall? Hundreds of thousands, if not up to 1 million.
Okay.
Which is a very high.
Why would they die building the wall, though?
They were pushed too hard. And
okay.
And also, this region of China are very cruel and just terrible weather conditions. Some parts of these wall apparently also was built on mountainous areas where no one would go anyways. So it didn't really make sense. But it's a border. It's whatever the emperor and his planners said.
So if they drew the line over a mountain,
you gotta build it.
You gotta build that wall over the mountain. Okay.
Exactly. So upon the first Qing emperor's death, the empire plunged into civil war. There were peasant uprisings. There were multiple armies raised by descendants of noblemen from the warring state period beforehand. And this was all also made worse by floods and droughts in between. Okay. In 207 BC, the Qing Shi Huang, the Qing emperor's son, which is another emperor, was killed by a close political aide of the Qing court called Zhao Gao. So it was an inside job. Just wanted to mention that. And the dynasty collapsed entirely.
Wait, what court? Qing court?
Yeah.
How's
Not
that?
Qing court. Qing court.
Oh.
The Qing Empire.
Say the two words, because there's also the Qing, which is like the last Chinese empire.
Yeah, it's Qing, so it's Qing.
Yeah.
It's a bit, the pronunciation.
Say them both.
Okay, it's Qing is the prior one. Qing is the later one.
Okay. So Qing and Qing.
Exactly. That's so different. Yeah.
Okay.
Coming from you.
I'm just a decadent barbarian Westerner, Cherry.
Yes. So the Qing Empire, as mighty as it was, having done, the giving it the credit of having united China and did all these things, and I guess started the Great Wall, it really only lasted like 15 years or so. And the barbarians on the other side of the wall was not the direct cause that had led to its ending.
Yeah, it's
right?
internal.
Yeah. So the short-lived Qing Empire did leave some legacies behind. Okay? For one, the border was in fact established. There was a border now, the northern border. The civilized Chinese people living inside the wall, which later sort of became the Han race, but at this point there's no concept of the Han race just yet. Okay, the barbaric nomads living outside the wall were not of one people. Okay, so that was established, and even though in reality the nomads on the other side of the wall were more or less chased away first from their own land by these people inside the wall, right? And so that the Qing emperor can expand his almighty empire. But once again, history is written by the people with pens. So the history we tell now is one that the nomads were the invaders, and we, the people inside the wall, was peaceful settlers and, the defenders of the nation that's called China.
Yeah. So it's like when you used to hear old stories of the Wild West, and it's like Native Americans would just attack these peaceful settlers.
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
like, well, they wouldn't have to attack you if you weren't there.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So, okay. So they pushed them out. So, but I mean, I guess it also left a legacy of now China is a thing that exists. Oh, you're getting
for another legacy that the Qing Empire has left. Even though many Chinese political philosophers and historians later recognized that the Qing Emperor's brutal techniques and tyranny had produced resistance among the people. Right? Especially the conscripted peasants, many of them have died and their families has died, and the farmers whose labors built the empire. And this widespread anger and resistance of the people had led to the doomsday of the dynasty very quickly. However, the later dynasties that succeeded it did not seem to learn the lesson. They inherited the imperial bureaucratic political system for many, many years. They built long, expensive, elaborate construction projects such as the wall, and more regardless of whether they could have afforded it or not throughout history. So I guess that's not a legacy. That's more like a lesson not learned.
Yeah.
So anyhow, that was the beginning of this tale of the Great Wall. Not the beginning of the real Great Wall, but okay.
So the first Great Wall,
it wasn't the Great Wall. It was just a wall.
It was just a wall.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was pretty big. But it never actually really got used for its intended purpose. No one ever really attacked it, as far as but not in 15 years at least.
Yeah, well, I mean, nomads would sometimes raid, right? They would come inside the wall, but the wall, given that most of the time is very low and it's made of earth matters, it really was more there to define the border.
Okay. So it's like
also I guess just to make people's lives harder.
So it's like the U.S. wall in the desert. You can get through it if you really want to.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of there to mark where it is.
Like it had to look like a wall, and I'm sure it was very terrible, terribly hardship to build it, because it was very long. But there is no accurate record, and we don't really know. There's some parts where like there's all these walls all over China, and historians will go. I guess not historians. What are they called?
Archaeologists.
Archaeologists will go and be like, okay, so this was from this year and that. But the majority of the walls built up from this period were gone. Also, they didn't have bricks back then, so like
the Roman walls from that period are still here, Cherry.
Sure, right? Oh, you Americans.
The Roman buildings are still here. The Roman roads.
I was gonna say you Americans and your yourself.
We don't have anything to do with it.
I know, but you think of yourself as Rome.
I know. Which is not a very good thing to be, because Rome was a terrible, terrible country that just destroyed everything around it and just incinerated itself. But
besides the later part, what's wrong with destroying everything around it?
It's true, right, I guess?
I'm joking. Okay, anyhow, so that was the beginning. And after the Qing Dynasty had ended, there was a revolving door of dynasties that come and go. And on and off, some of them repaired and expanded the collection of walls at the northern border. Some of them didn't. They just left it alone. So that both was the common. Fast forward to the 14th century under the Ming Dynasty, the second to last imperial dynasty in China. The concept of having an established northern border wall was sort of revived.
Okay.
And this time, outside the wall was the Mongolians. Unable to gain an upper hand through military battles, the Ming court decided that to build the wall was the way to go. So this time, the majority of the Ming walls were built in the Ordos Desert, so the Inner Mongolia area today. Along the acknowledged border between the Mongolians and the Chinese.
Okay.
The Ming people devoted considerable resources to repair and reinforce the walls, with the section near the capital, Beijing at this time, especially strong and built with sophisticated methods, using bricks and stones.
So this is more than the kind of the early walls.
Yes. So actually, many of the walls that we see today, most of them were built around this time.
Okay.
So this is the 14th century. So I guess they are like 600 years old.
Okay.
That's fair. It's
pretty old.
Yeah. Not as old as Roman walls.
Well, it does put it into perspective, just as a side note. So Cherry and I were in Worcestershire, not the sauce, but the county in England, or the city in England, and we were at a bed and breakfast, and there was this I don't know, it was like this like side house, and it was like 500 years old, and it's just like a place you can go and like get a cocktail.
Yeah.
So my conception of how old buildings should be living in America is very warped, because to me anything older than like 100 years is like an antique.
Well, we went on a road trip recently, right?
Yeah.
And we were in Denver, and there was these historical buildings downtown, and it was like 1979 or something like that.
Yeah, it was like 80 years old or something.
It wasn't. It was way younger than that.
No, it was pretty old.
It was older than 1979?
Yeah, it was older than 1979 is like a
1940s maybe?
A Pizza Hut.
Yeah, maybe like 1940s?
Yeah, like 1940s or something.
Okay, yeah, 1940s.
Right?
So the part near the Beijing was very strong and mighty and looking great, right? However, some other parts of the wall was still built with earth matters, with some stones maybe, and really only serving the purpose of marking a border, rather than like being like the wall in like Game of Thrones,
Okay.
So then during this time, the Mongols have never stopped their raid across the border, however. And, in the good times, the watchtowers along the wall and the gates on the wall themselves will help facilitate trade, like I said, communication and exchange of resources. And from a defense perspective, the idea of these walls were not that the Mongols the idea was not that the Mongols would have to literally climb the wall or something to defend the cities, right? The idea was that military campaigns needed more careful planning and would be more difficult because of the border that's established. And since it's easy to run a few horses, through a gate, and do some raid overnight. However, it's much harder to manage the continuous supply of goods and soldiers and horses that are required for an all-out war if the gate is closed behind them.
Okay. So at this point, though, again, I mean, all nations of a certain kind of organization, build walls, right? Right. All nations build roads. All nations build walls. All nations build cities.
So let me say this.
So this was just infrastructure work at this point, right?
Yeah,
it wasn't.
This is infrastructure
it's just like, maybe they did a lot of them. They were good at it, but it's not. It's just
I don't know if
expected.
they were good at it, but they did a lot of it.
Okay.
Whether they were good or not, they wanted to do it.
China's a big place. You need a lot of walls.
Yes, there was this obsession, though, to define the border because, we don't want to be like the barbarians.
Well,
we don't want to be conquered again.
I mean, because in the West, right? I mean, or other places, like, normally borders go across rivers or across mountains.
The English Channel.
Yeah, right, or oceans. But I mean, in China to the west, it just keeps going, right?
Well, it's called the Eurasia area, right?
Yeah.
So that along Inner Mongolian area, northeastern China, it was just mountains. It was just endless.
You got to put a line somewhere.
You got to put a line
because there's no natural line. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, both the Yellow River and the Yangtze River are within China now, right? So, so those are not borders anymore. Yeah. So in 1644, one part of the Great Wall played a major role in the transition of power in China. Okay.
Okay.
A fortification that's called Shanghai Pass. So it's Shanghai Guan in Chinese. And the Ming army held this heavily fortified pass most of the time. And so this is part of the Great Wall, but it's not like the most part of the Great Wall. So this pass was built as a square with the perimeter of around 4 kilometers, which is 2.5 miles.
So it's more of a fort than a wall.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
The walls of the fort reach a height of 14 meters, which is about 46 feet.
Okay.
And they are 7 meters, which is about 23 feet thick. Mm-hmm. So that's really thick. The east, south, and north sides of the fort was surrounded by a deep, wide moat, which is water, with drawbridges over it. In the middle of the pass stands a tall bell tower. So basically, this tower was very fortified, and it sits at a very strategically important location. And if you're coming from the northern part of China today into Beijing, the capital, you would have to take it.
Yeah.
These fortresses alongside the wall that's connected by the wall is sort of has more of a military
the strong points
importance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Shanghai Pass is one of them. And so you might think, because after the Ming Dynasty, it was the Qing Dynasty, right? The Manchurians took over China.
Yeah.
You might think, which is what I thought, the Manchurians took over the Shanghai Pass and took over the country. End of story.
Yeah.
No. It was more complicated than that. And in my opinion, more comical than that.
Okay.
But that might not be a good, patriotic attitude. So,
well, they're all dead now, Cherry. It's all kind of in the past.
The Ming Dynasty was not first overthrown by the Manchurians. In 1644, the Chinese rebel leader called Li Zicheng marched his military into the capital from within the wall. It was yet another peasant uprising. Okay. That had marked the official end of the Ming Dynasty. However, there was this powerful Ming general whose name is Wu Sangui, who was the commander of the garrisons north of the wall, near Shanghai Pass.
Okay.
At Shanghai Pass, really. And he wasn't at the capital. He didn't have a battle with the rebel armies. So he was just sitting there. And the rebel leader wanted his support to complete the task of establishing this new China. However, the general contacted the Manchurians outside the wall in northern part of China today, and suggesting that they combine forces to drive out the rebel army.
I'm shaking my head.
The Manchurians agreed and marched their army to Shanghai Pass to receive the general's surrender. Together, the general's army and the Manchus defeated the rebel army near the pass, sort of kind of easily.
The Romans did this all the time, and then the barbarians don't want to leave.
Yes. So the rebel army and the leaders, they abandoned the capital. Wu Sangui, the general, opened the gate to the Shanghai Pass. The Manchurians' army swiftly entered the gate, went to Beijing unopposed, and established themselves as the new dominant power in China. So I don't know if the Ming general had planned for it. He goes down in the history of China as this just famous
What happened to him
betrayal.
afterwards?
Well, he was made a king under the Qing Emperor.
Oh, he did pretty well for himself.
And lived out his days. Yeah. So he was fine. Perhaps he made a wise choice.
I mean, he might have, because probably the rebel people might have just killed him.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, they were asking for his support
because
he did have a sizable, army. So one note to add is that before this successful conquering, the Manchurians have already passed the Great Wall multiple times, to raid inside the Ming territories. So it was not, they're familiar with the situation in the land. And the Great Wall didn't stop them before. Only that this time it was for conquer, and that it was even easier than the times they did the raid, because someone from the inside literally opened the door for them.
And let them in.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Great Wall did not help prevent the end of the Ming Dynasty either. I think that's fair to say.
There's never like any incident, obviously, like the Great Wall movie with, was it Brad Pitt, Matt Damon? Obviously those were like lizard monsters. But there was never really any situation where it's like the armies of China lined up on the Great Wall and fought off the barbarians.
It didn't really work like that.
I guess maybe they would line up on the walls of some fort.
Even if you go to like the famous part of the wall today that is, hot tourist location, you will see that they're established really on the very, very high mountains.
Yeah.
And no horse could get up there. How you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
probably why. Okay. I mean, that's probably partially because those are some of the only ones that are left. Because I know that. Yeah,
but I'm sure there's battles around the wall, right? And I'm sure the wall sometimes served as a front. But I think it's fair to say that it didn't work like the fantastical, legendary sort of image that's painted in pop culture today.
Or so it wasn't like the Great Wall in a Game of Thrones.
No,
where the wildlings come and you have to.
Also, that's a magical wall. Like that's not a.
Yes, sure. I'm aware that's not a documentary.
Okay, I'm just saying that's not a comparison. It's not like that.
Okay,
I already did say that it's not like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So at this point, I would like to refer to a poem written by Wang Sitong, a late 17th century historian and poet, only 6-year-old at the time of the fall of the Ming Dynasty.
Did he write this at 6?
No, he wrote it later.
Okay.
But this is just to refer that he grew up having experienced this downfall of the Ming Dynasty and the taken over of the country by the Qing Dynasty. His people were forced to shave off their head and grow a queue. Refer to our first episode.
Watch our first episode
if you were interested. So I would like to read this poem, a part of it. So the men of Qing, the first, empire, built the Long Wall as a defense against the barbarians. Up went the Long Wall and down came the empire. People are still laughing about it today. Who would have imagined then that the Ming, to protect themselves from northern enemies, would also decide building walls was the answer to all their problems? They called theirs the border wall instead of the long wall. Endlessly, they built walls without even pausing for breath. As soon as it was announced the walls were built in the east, it would be reported that hordes of barbarians have raided to the west. They rampaged through collapsed walls as if over flat ground, plundering whatever and wherever they liked. When the barbarians retreated, up went the walls again. The builders worked from dawn till dusk, and what was the use? The gentry and ministers all squandered government funds, wasting money needed for farming. Why did we build walls for 10,000 miles? Dynasty after dynasty have done the same thing, so why do we only laugh at the first emperor of Qing?
I mean, I guess his point is like, it's not enough to have a wall, but you have to be strong enough internally to fight these people. You can't just like expect a wall to keep them out.
Yes. So Wang Sitong, he was one of the authors hired by the Qing government to compile the standard history of the Ming Dynasty in the early decades of the new dynasty. And I think, he spoke for everyone in his poem. So he knew the history. He was a historian. And I just felt like this poem was too good to pass. Yeah. And so let me know, this was translated by Julia Lowell.
Okay.
She is a very accomplished author on Chinese matters. And, I will recommend her books if you come across them.
Okay, so there's this myth of the Great Wall. But in reality, I mean, if any barbarians or they're not really, I mean, if any steppe peoples were kept out of China, it was because of Chinese armies. It wasn't because there was a wall there.
No.
Right? The wall was just kind of like, a line in the sand.
Yeah.
Saying this is China and that's not. Okay.
More, yeah, exactly. So Shanghai Pass, this important fortress, is going to come up again. But later on that. For now, I want to talk about the Great Wall during the Qing Dynasty, the last dynasty of China.
Okay.
The last imperial dynasty of China.
And this was the dynasty that the Manchurians founded after somebody let them in.
Into the wall, yes.
Yeah.
So first, the Qing Dynasty at its early years didn't really have an interest in maintaining the wall anymore. Coming from the nomadic roots, their relationship with the Mongolians on the other side of the wall was relatively peaceful. Yeah. They were like bros, they get each other.
They're like, you're steppe peoples, we're steppe peoples.
Yeah.
We ride camels, you ride horses.
We just need to suppress these Han people together, right?
Okay.
So, on the other hand, for the east portion of the wall, it was originally blocking themselves. From the outside. So since now they're in control of territories on both sides, why bother?
Yeah.
And however, later on, ironically, the Qing court decided to make an effort to repair and rebuild part of the wall to define a border between the Manchurian area, which is the northeastern area of China today, and the area where the Han people, lived, which is the rest of China,
okay.
I guess. And this time, the wall was built to keep the Han people out of the Manchurian areas. So how ironic, the roles have reversed.
Wait, I don't get it. Why would they want to keep Chinese people out of Manchuria?
So the Manchurians...
When you say Chinese, you mean Han people, right? Because
Sorry,
Manchurians
we're
are
all Chinese today, but
Chinese people now today, right?
Yeah. So Manchurians took over the country, established themselves as the empire, just like all the Chinese empires, just like all the Chinese emperors before them. However, they made a very conscious effort to not integrate and assimilate themselves with the Han people.
Okay.
They kept up the nomadic tradition of being skilled horse riders, warriors, trained for swords fighting and all that stuff. And they never lost their language, which is not Mandarin Chinese. It was Manchurian.
Okay.
Right? And they kept their hairstyle, made every Han person to wear the hairstyle too. And they, they kept their sort of social family structure at large.
Because
so they were like, we're not going to be the same.
Yeah, because I guess the fear is we'll get soft.
Yeah, we can't lose our roots.
We can't lose our edge.
Yes. So the wall building was to keep the, just like you said, to keep the purity of the Manchurian race, right? Keep them tough or whatever, right?
Okay, interesting.
And not to be eroded by the Han culture.
Not let any of these Han Chinese people come and sell them silks and tea and...
Exactly.
Okay.
So it wasn't wartime anymore, right? So it's understandable that near the borders, people will, migrate and sort of integrate, but segregation.
Okay, interesting.
And starting the 16th, 17th century, the Society of Jesus started sending their priests to China. This will make sense. I promise.
Society of Jesus?
Yeah, which is the religious order of the Catholic Church headquartered in Rome. Wait. The ones that send out Jesuits.
Oh, Jesuit priests.
Jesuits priests.
Okay.
Yeah. I just wanted to look up the organization that sent them.
Okay.
So how do you say them? Jesuits?
Yeah. So Jesuits are called the Brotherhood of Jesus?
The Society of Jesus.
Oh, I didn't know that. I always just thought they were called Jesuits.
Yeah. So, they were sent around the world, not just China, to engage in evangelization.
Work.
Yeah, to be missioners.
Okay.
Missioners? Commissioners?
Not commissioners.
Missionaries?
Yeah, missionaries.
To be missionaries. Please don't cut this in.
Yeah.
To be missionaries. Okay, so the ones that were sent to China, there were many of them, were received by the various Qing emperors themselves. These priests had learned Chinese and Manchurian, and they really integrated themselves in the Qing court, at the center of the power. So they would live in the palace, sort of, and teach the emperor, the god's ways, I guess.
Probably also just like English and stuff
and
too.
Western culture, Western technology, and and sort of accompany the emperor to go around. Through these Jesuits in China, this cult of the Great Wall admiration somehow got started around this time.
Okay.
During the 16th and 17th century, under the Jesuit gaze, descriptions and propaganda around these Chinese walls had gone through a huge transformation. At the beginning, we started with plain walls by travelers' accounts at the beginning of the 17th century. And then later it was called this famous wall, quote, in 1681. And then in 1683 it was described as that prodigious wall. And in 1693 it was called this Great Wall. And finally, in 1738 it was called the Great Wall. It's got an official name now.
Meanwhile, Chinese poets are like, it's a joke.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So... And these quotes are taken from the letters and diaries and reports that sent back to Europe by the Jesuits.
The Chinese people must have been like, they must not have any walls in Europe.
I don't even know the Chinese people knew they were talking about this, right?
Okay.
So with the hope of converting China to Catholicism, had led to heavy investment on the part of the Society of Jesus.
Okay.
Therefore, there was this committed effort by the Jesuits on the ground to justify their life's work by propping up the virtues of China in letters and diaries and records that they sent back.
Okay, so they have like, this grand,
this is
majestic
wonderful
place.
Yeah.
And if we can convert these
we
people...
must continue this work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And China back then was such a myth, right, to Europeans.
Also probably it was a cushy job.
Yeah, 100% was a cushy job. It was a great job.
Right.
Okay, so if
you get on going
to
Japan.
If you get on the good side of the emperor.
Yeah.
Right? So there's an art to it. Come on. And in addition, as soon as the Europeans realized, even though the Europeans later realized how advanced they were in weaponry compared to China, right, around this time, in their eyes, it was still an empire, an Asian empire with lots and lots of trade opportunities to get rich on. So they decided to sort of play to this egocentric complex of the Middle Kingdom, which exists, right? I have to admit, right?
I mean, it exists today.
Exists. It's even more so today.
Get your feet up.
Oh my God. Okay.
Cherry keeps kicking the table that the mic's attached to.
So they're like, let's talk it up, let's praise the glory of China. And these, with these very extravagant accounts, the name of the Great Wall was made in the West. When I say the West, I mean the Europe at this point.
Okay.
And even though most of these priests who sent out these glorious descriptions of the Great Wall of China themselves did not even travel so much to see more of the Great Wall. Really, they just made those decisions and descriptions by observing the most well-done part near the Beijing capital. Because that's the prettiest part, right? I mean, yeah, sure, it looks great, but they sort of decided that's how the entire length of the Great Wall must look like. And that's how they described it. And that they thought, oh, it was all 1800 years old, and because this is 600 years before our time.
Okay.
So they thought all of this was built in the Qing's time, I think at this point, unknown to the Qing court though, they wasn't really aware of this fanfare.
Okay. This fandom
so China
over the
at
Great
this
Wall.
point was not trying to advertise how great we have this wall, because the wall is the least of the accomplishments, right? Does that make sense? Like there was the Silk Road right now, right? There was the tea trade.
Yeah.
And there's all these, all these China, like porcelain, like pieces, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of other things that the Chinese my people were proud of.
Yeah.
And yes, we did think we were the mighty Middle Kingdom, right? And you guys are all barbarians. Everyone else is barbarians. But really, I think the myth of the Great Wall was created by these descriptions, that sort of just made up, not on the Chinese count. But
because from the Chinese perspective, it's like, yeah, we built a wall on the border. That's just what you do.
Build walls.
That's what you do.
Like, what do you? Yeah.
Yeah. How else are you going to know where the border is? We put a wall there. Like,
Yes.
what's the big deal?
Right. So even though later priests tried to play down the all these glorious accounts by the earlier Jesuits, the Great Wall has gotten its name, even though today in China it's still called the Long Wall. Sometimes it's called the 10,000 miles long wall, but it's not the Great Wall.
So the movie The Great Wall wasn't called The Great Wall in China?
It's called the Long Wall.
Interesting.
Right? So this myth of a concept that's called the Great Wall, with capitalized letters each of the in front of each of the word, is really a Western created myth.
Yeah, there is only one. There's lots of Great Walls, but there's only one.
The Great Wall.
Yeah,
that can be seen from outer space.
Yeah,
I'm joking. Yeah. So the rest is history, I guess.
Yeah.
This is not where the story ends. So back to China. Okay.
Well, we never left China, Cherry.
I know.
This is the With Chinese Characteristics podcast. We're always in China. We're always in China.
Sorry. Yeah. Excuse my misspoke.
Yeah.
You can never escape China.
A little close to home there, Cherry.
Yeah. So, but let's walk back to modern day China.
Okay.
So the Chinese interest of our own wall happened much later than the foreign enthusiasm. Okay. So the Qing court eventually ended, was abolished, and Sun Yat-sen, the first president of China as a republic in the 20th century, early 20th century, was the first politician to see the Great Wall as the potential national symbol. To him, it represented the sacrifices made by the Chinese people against the foreigners.
Okay.
And
did he read that poem?
Clearly not, or he didn't get it. But then in recent years, so in earlier years, in ancient times, it was the sacrifice made by the Chinese people, right? So that was very representative. And in recent years, it's an object of great representation internationally that had brought admiration to the Chinese from the Europeans, right? Which is true, I guess.
Yeah.
Thanks to the Catholic Jesuits.
I don't know. When I was in China, people are like, "Did you see the Great Wall?"
Really?
Yeah, everybody asks that.
Okay.
Right? It's like if you go to New York, it's like, "Did you see the Statue of Liberty?"
Okay, I have been to Beijing, the great part of the Great Wall too.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was very grand.
Yeah.
You can't say that it's not, but it's not. It's more complicated than that.
Okay.
China is not a one-dimensional character. Okay. Yeah. So Sun Yat-sen installed the Great Wall as a symbol of national strength and endurance in the popular imagination. So he really did bring it back. Bring this concept up in China. Another Chinese leader, Mao.
Haven't heard of him, Cherry. Who's this? Who are you talking about? Who's this Mao fellow?
I think if you're listening to this podcast, there's a small
does
chance
he have
that
a
you
last
don't know
name?
who he is.
I'm not sure I've heard of Mao.
Yeah.
Did he have an ideology? Did he believe anything?
So he wrote poems about the Great Wall during the Long March.
Okay.
And
interesting.
However,
Mao didn't like old stuff.
At some point later, his attitude have changed.
Oh, okay.
Then, during the Cultural Revolution, many parts of the Great Wall was destroyed. Local peasants were encouraged to build houses using bricks stolen from the Great Wall.
Oh.
So, that's not surprising now, right?
Mao's a bad friend. He was getting inspired by the Great Wall, and then he turns on it. Okay.
Yeah. So that had done considerable damage to the Ming, to the Great Walls that built with bricks during the Ming time.
Okay.
And then, fast forward to 1984, Deng Xiaoping, another mighty Chinese leader, famously wrote this calligraphy work. Let's love our China and rebuild our Great Wall.
Okay.
And it was thought to sort of stop. People thought like he wrote it to stop this, this destruction to the Great Wall.
Okay.
This was 1984. China was trying to get it back together still. Become a modern country again. Not just like a crazy land. Yeah. So, so this attitude of the Great Wall has sort of changed through time, just like everything that we talk about.
Yeah.
I guess that's like my famous line at this point. But, so from a symbol that was sort of man-made by the Jesuits and then picked up as China becomes a republic.
Yeah.
And then being hated on because it was a symbol of the old, right? And then sort of brought back together because now we need this, we're trying to rebuild this nationalistic image of China, right? And, what better ways to use this symbol as one of the symbols, I guess. So, but I want to go back to Shanghai Pass for a second.
Okay.
So this part, this passage, this fortified fortress, I guess, as part of the Great Wall, it was sitting at a very strategic, location that was very important in a war or a battle. And it did serve that purpose. A lot of things happened at Shanghai Pass in the 20th century, perhaps more than it had ever happened before when it was built and intended to keep out the Manchurians and people. And so first, the Shanghai Pass formed the southern limit of the Russian sphere of influence as defined in the convention between Great Britain and Russia of 28th of April 1899. So that's still the century of shame,
Okay, so that was the edge of the border.
Yeah, of the influence, I guess, because China was never officially colonized, right?
Yeah.
And then in July 1900, 15,000 Japanese troops landed at Shanghai Pass prior to marching to Beijing to relieve the siege of the legations by the Boxers.
Okay.
So it was the Boxer Rebellion.
It's the 7-nation army or 8-nation alliance or whatever.
Yeah, but the Japanese troops were the ones who landed there.
Okay.
And apparently there was a bombardment. However, it said it was not necessary as few Chinese troops were present. Okay. So they sort of just landed there and marched through it.
Yeah.
And in November 1945, during the Chinese Civil War, the Northeastern People's Liberation Army, the POA, attempted to hold Shanghai Pass against the KMT, the National Party. Mm-hmm. Forces attacked from the south. So the Nationalist Party was coming from the south, and the POA was trying to hold the Shanghai Pass as the entry point to the north.
Okay.
1945. And they sought to keep Chiang Kai-shek's army out of Manchuria, actually. The POA forces of 10,000 were under-equipped and too few to defend the position, and they retreated. So I guess they weren't able to defend Manchuria from that point.
Okay.
But it was the focal point of the battle.
The wall,
mm-hmm.
right, was obviously built and is more of a map marker.
Yeah.
But all of the actual important places that you actually were worried
sort
about,
of be connected by the wall on the border.
Yeah. So the wall was connecting them, but the actual real places where you would actually have resistance, they built actual forts there.
Oh, they built actual pretty serious fortresses.
Yeah.
Yeah. The wall of the Shanghai Pass was 7 meters thick.
Yeah.
Which is, 7 meters is what? I think I have the numbers here. 23 feet?
Yeah, sounds
thick?
about.
Yeah.
And then, the wall connecting them, is just to kind of stop raiding and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting.
So to the modern time today.
Yeah.
So the famous claim that you hear might be the Great Wall can be seen from outer space.
Yeah.
In actuality, the Great Wall is like a highway street. Not like the California highways was not the 405 was 8 lanes.
Yeah.
Maybe one was 4 lanes or something.
Yeah.
When it's where it's the thickest, the most broad areas.
Yeah.
Right, part of it. And Yang Liwei, this Chinese astronaut, being the first Chinese astronaut who was sent to space and came back successfully.
Mm-hmm.
I have this vivid memory when I was little and watching him on TV, very inspiring. And he came back, and the Chinese media had asked him, maybe it was the Chinese media, but some reporter had asked him, have you seen the Great Wall from outer space? And he said, no, I couldn't see it. And I thought that was such a heroic moment for me.
that he was honest about it.
Yeah.
That he didn't go, yeah, of course, it was great.
Yeah, no, he was. I didn't see it. It wasn't you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so no, you can't really. I mean, obviously, if you can see a road, at a certain height, you can see the Great Wall.
Yeah, if you have a
but
telescope.
It's not. Yeah. Yeah. If you can't see the Yellow River, you can't see the Great Wall. It's a simple matter of
size
of physics and
yeah.
how the human eye work, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm glad he did that.
Well, the interesting thing is I don't know where I kind of think that must have come from the West too, right?
The myth might not be created by my fellow Chinese people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But obviously today, the Great Wall is clearly being used by us as a propaganda piece, right?
Yeah.
Which is fine. And it's a very popular tourist attraction. And the part near Beijing, if you have a chance, you should go see it. It's pretty amazing to see. And in recent years, there's all these fake Great Wall that is being erected all over China at various tourist locations. And there's some backlashes against them.
Yeah.
Because they're costly to build, right? It requires a lot of bricks and stones. And a few of them, from what I researched, really aimed to have the original size of the biggest part of the wall sort of recreated locally. And they wanted to serve it as an attraction.
So this would be
tourist attraction.
This would be where it was, though.
No.
Oh, it would just be outside of some village in Shanghai.
I actually looked it up. I think the official sort of position, right, is actually, I would support it because they say, okay, so if we can maintain the wall, we'll maintain it. But the goal is not to recreate too much of it. right? You just the goal is so that it's secure, like bricks aren't falling down on people, like if they walk by, right? But otherwise, we should stick to the authenticity of history, right? Show people what it looks like today after many, many years. So these new fake Great Walls would be at the location where it's got nothing to do with the location of the original Great Wall, and they all look new and shiny and cost a lot of money to build. So there are some backlashes, but there are some people who go, people just, it's like Las Vegas.
It's like Cinderella's castle in Disneyland.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know how I feel about it. I feel kind of sad for the original Great Wall because I think you should see it. If you really want to see it, you should go see it. But, and maybe it's a good investment, even though it costs a lot of money to build because people would come.
Well,
but it's a thing. It's a thing that happens.
It's like Civilization 6, Cherry. Once you hit the modern era, the Great Wall gives you tourism points.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's all about the
long run. And you can just
say,
I've been there if it's the original. It's the same size. And who would know,
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the Great Wall in our modern times.
There really is this image, right, of this just like never-ending, perfectly kind of uniform stone wall with towers every so many feet,
Yes, there is part of that. It's not never-ending. And they weren't all built 2,200 years ago. Most of them were built. Well, the ones built 2,200 years ago are all gone. Yeah.
But the Ming Dynasty ones.
I guess maybe the true sort of accomplishment is that China had this border of 2,200 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It sort of speaks to the lengthy history of my country that...
there's a concept of China over 2,200 years.
Exactly. So that might be the bigger sort of like cultural indication, right, of that.
Because the Romans built things, but I mean... Even though
they're gone.
Yeah, right. Even though where they have a legacy, there's nobody seriously considers what the borders of Rome were for any sort of actual political purpose, right?
Yeah.
No one's actually kind of trying to use that as a guide for the modern world.
Yeah. And really this border of China really lasted until like the end of the Qing Dynasty, and the new China was established, and the Inner Mongolia and Outer Mongolia became two divided, right? And then but Inner Mongolia being part of China, hopefully this is get us banned, was not a constant thing that we had. This was a new thing that Inner Mongolia is part of China.
Yeah.
Up till very recently in the grand scheme of things. Now, what's the border, sort of? I don't know. I'm asking the American perspective here. Is that part of what the fascination could be?
I think part of the fascination is that in the, the kind of Western states of the period, towns have walls, noblemen have walls, even like if you have a manor, like you look in like the English countryside, why are they so big and built of stone and stuff? It's like, well, because you might need to use it as a fort, right? And the idea, I think, that you can just build this massive wall on your border and keep all the bad people out and not have them internally kind of, I think, lends itself to kind of a grandiose idea of organization.
Yeah, so actually, and I think I should have talked about it, but like the Jesuits, right, coming from a Europe that was very, because this was, they were in China, obviously, officially, they were in China 16th, 17th century.
Yeah.
But Europe, before its several revolutions of, industrial and... Europe had a very long war-torn time, right?
Oh, yeah. Europe is one of the most... even after the Industrial Revolutions, Europe is one of the most... people talk about, like, places like Africa, like there's some sort of war-torn country. Europe is like the most war-torn country, right? So
coming from that and go to China and this sleepy... like long tradition empire, right? That's just, it's like a sleepy dragon that just sits there and it seems very stable, right?
Yeah.
And especially in the Qing Dynasty, which did last a few hundred years.
Yeah.
And you come here and then you go, wow, everything is so in order. And I think that was sort of described by the Jesuits in their letters, how they find that fascinating and almost envious in a way.
Yeah.
In their letters as though, so that I thought that was interesting too, because it would be sort of a different scene, right?
Oh yeah.
Even though Europe was more like advancing weaponry and all that stuff, maybe partly due to the wars, right?
Yeah. Oh, these people, they figured it out. They built a big wall to keep all the bad people out.
Yeah.
Everybody here can kind of just live peacefully.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
they didn't know people were getting killed because they wouldn't want to like shave their head.
I know, right?
They came after that.
Interesting. So I guess in kind of conclusion, the Great Wall was a great wall, It's probably pretty good at being a wall, but the idea of it as this sort of monolithic barrier to invasion is really sort of overblown. And the idea of it as this iconic accomplishment of the Chinese people is really a modern thing, right? And that to people of the period...
Hated it.
Well, some of them did, but I mean, some of them probably just thought like, well, yeah, we put a wall there. Like, what else are you going to do?
Not the ruling. No, the peasants had to build it. They hated it. Did you not hear the poem that I just read you?
I mean, the peasants, probably hated most things about
I know.
The imperial system in China.
Yes. But with the danger, risking sounding like some Chinese propaganda, like mouthpiece, I think that...
Well, you don't want to blow your cover, Cherry.
I know. The concept...
You won't get your checks anymore from the party.
A concept... Where is my check? I'm waiting for it. It would be great if I... no, I'm just kidding. Checks. Finally making some money from this podcast.
Yeah.
No, this fascinating, sort of fantastical idea of the Great Wall, which is, again, the name that only exists in English.
Yeah.
In China, we just call it the 10,000 miles long wall. It does have sort of a weird tinted lens.
Yeah.
Right? And it's... To prop China up, sure, maybe that's... You can all say that's like just bad or negative, right? But it does have a... It came from a limited understanding and the fascination, but also like the... How do you say it? Like the what's the phrase for that? Oriental.
Yeah, Orientalism.
Orientalism that, obviously today we look at it, we're like, yeah, that's weird, right?
Yeah.
But that's what it was built on, the Orientalism.
Yeah. And I think it's also interesting because if you think about it, most of the people who made modern China, aside from Mao, a lot of them weren't educated in China. They spent a long period of their lives overseas because a lot of them are political dissidents. So, they're part of their concept probably of what's great about China. It was also probably tinted from foreign opinion.
Also the struggle in the early 20th century to find this symbol. How do you make this country, right? After thousands of years of imperial rule. And the most recent one was the Manchurians who hated, they didn't hate the Han culture, right? But the ruling party was not of the Han culture. And obviously you have this nation of a majority and you go, okay, well, how do I unite them? I need to find some sort of symbol, right? And you pick this one that even though it's a little bit made up of a concept, and even though behind it is just the blood and tears of the people who had suffered from building this wall.
Yeah.
And in reality, their lives might be better if not without this wall, right?
But you need symbols to build a country.
Something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So just like you need an enemy. So I just think
maybe
that's interesting.
So maybe from that perspective, Cherry, China as a concept wouldn't exist without the Great Wall, the Long Wall.
Well, I think they would have found something else, but
I mean that kind of concept, right? That does put a border on it. That does kind of say this is what China is.
Yeah, and it's got a history. Yeah. That you can trace back to, and you can feel like you are the people who benefited or built this wall. Yeah. Which are really two groups of people, by the way.
So even if it never, obviously it's obviously stopped some, but even if it never really stopped a barbarian invasion, it might have protected China just by keeping the concept of a China.
Okay, what a nationalist!
I know, Cherry.
Sympathizer you are.
Here's my. Warm and fuzzy kind of...
Well, as a Chinese person, I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about that.
Yeah. Well, the Communist Party didn't make the Great Wall. You can like the Great Wall, Cherry.
Oh, no, I still have... Yeah.
Oh, okay. But So we
need to cut this part.
We need to cut this part? No, but I will say, though, that it is interesting that if it's nothing else, Sun Yat-sen picked a good symbol because you have a guy complaining about a wall that was built 1,700 years earlier, as if it's still the same country and the same people with the same things, right? That's like me complaining.
There's a continuity.
That's like me complaining about something that like English people did with the Vikings. Like, didn't they learn, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To kind of view it as like he's talking about it like I'm angry about something a past U.S. president did. Like there's that much connection between the two.
Yeah.
Right.
So I guess that's nice.
Yeah. So
To
I mean,
have something to look back on.
yeah. So
you know?
it does give that connection through the ages. So I think that's interesting.
Does that come from an American who has
no history?
Maybe like 5 generations of history.
Yeah. No culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it does.
Finally, I can feel superior.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Because I mean, I can't look back at anything. Obviously, I can say like, oh yeah, we're descended. Look, our thing's called the Senate, right? But the kind of, like we have a Senate, Rome had a Senate. But the idea to just look at it. I mean, he basically says it like the same way, like, won't those Republicans ever learn? You know what I mean? Like, that's not how you do stuff.
Yeah.
Like you're talking about something that happened 20 years ago or 10 years ago, but in reality it happened 1700 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe that's what the Great Wall protected. This 5,000 years, the concept of Chinese, superiority throughout the ages.
I feel very proud.
Do you? That's my goal here as an American, to make other countries feel good about themselves. How? Well, anyway, that was an episode of the With Chinese Characteristics podcast.
Yeah.
If you like it, let us know on Twitter. We have a Twitter. Thank everybody for listening. We really appreciate it. Cherry needs a place to come to concept with what it means to be
Chinese identity.
Much like Sun Yat-sen in 1912, 1915? 1912. Cherry has to figure out what it means to be Chinese and develop an identity.
Thank you for joining along on this
journey.
Anxious, blabbering journey of ours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening and have a nice day.
See you next time.